Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. We are moving to the next stage of the pandemic. As the world resets to the new normal, we find ourselves seeking the balance between health and livelihood, constantly adjusting the boundaries between liberty and responsibility. Here are tonight's news. First, the experimental drug Remdesivir has been authorized by U.S. regulators for emergency use against COVID-19, according to President Trump. This comes after the antiviral made by Gilead Sciences was shown in a major clinical trial to shorten the time to recovery in some coronavirus patients. The first time any medicine has had a proven benefit against the disease. Take a look.
I'm pleased to announce that Gilead now has an EUA from the FDA for Remdesivir. And you know what that is, because that's been the hot thing also in the papers and in the media for the last little while. An important treatment for hospitalized coronavirus patients. And it's something, I spoke with Dr. Khan and Dr. Fauci. I spoke with Deborah about it, and it's really a very promising situation. We've been doing work with the teams at the FDA, NIH, and Gilead for spearheading this public-private partnership to make this happen very quickly.
You know, on behalf of Gilead, to the President's point, we feel a tremendous responsibility. We're humbled by this being an important first step for patients, for hospitalized patients. We want to make sure nothing gets in the way of these patients getting the medicine, so we made a decision to donate about 1.5 million vials of Remdesivir. We'll be working with the government to determine how best to distribute that within the United States. We'll be working very closely to get that to patients, working with FEMA, working with other parts of the government to make sure that we get that to the patients in need as quickly as possible, because there are patients out there that can benefit from this medicine today that are hospitalized, and we don't want any time to waste for that.
Remdesivir, which is administered by an injection, was already available to some patients who enrolled in clinical trials or who sought it out on a compassionate use basis. The new move allows it to be distributed far more widely and used in both adults and children who are hospitalized with a severe form of COVID-19. The Food and Drug Administration, which authorized the approval, defines severe as having low blood oxygen levels, requiring oxygen therapy, or being on a ventilator. The U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases announced the results of the trial involving more than 1,000 people on Wednesday. It found that hospitalized COVID-19 patients with respiratory distress got better quicker than those on a placebo. Specifically, patients on the drug had a 31% faster time to recovery. Here's Dr. Fauci.
That the data shows that Remdesivir has a clear-cut, significant, positive effect in diminishing the time to recovery. This is really quite highly significant. If you look at the time to recovery being shorter in the Remdesivir arm, it was 11 days compared to 15 days concept. Because what it is proven is that a drug can block this virus. And I'll give you an example in a moment of why we think, looking forward, this is very optimistic. The mortality rate trended towards being better in the sense of less deaths in the Remdesivir group. 8% versus 11% in the placebo group. This drug happens to be blocking an enzyme that the virus uses, and that's an RNA polymerase. But there are a lot of other enzymes that the virus uses that are now going to be targets for this. This will be the standard of care, but we think it's really opening the door to the fact that we now have the capability of treating, and I can guarantee you, as more people, more companies, more investigators get involved, it's going to get better and better.
While not considered a miracle cure, Remdesivir's trial achieved a proof of concept, according to Dr. Fauci, that could pave the way for better treatments. Remdesivir incorporates itself into the virus's genome, short-circuiting its replication process. It was first developed to treat Ebola, a viral hemorrhagic fever, but did not boost survival rates as other medicines. Remdesivir has been shown to speed up recovery times for patients with COVID-19 in a major U.S.-led trial, becoming the first drug with proven benefit against the disease. Meanwhile, more U.S. states eased pandemic lockdown measures on Friday, even as coronavirus deaths rose. Now, Texas became the largest U.S. state yet to ease the curbs. But Governor Greg Abbott sounded a note of caution, tweeting and saying that Texans should continue to practice social distancing and follow health guidelines. Take a look.
Now, it's time to set a new course, a course that responsibly opens up business in Texas. We will open in a way that uses safe standards for businesses, for their employees, as well as for their customers. Standards based upon data and on doctors. We will open Texas businesses in phases. Phase 1 begins this Friday, May 1st. If we can contain the spread of COVID-19 during that time period, we can move to phase 2 as early as May the 18th. Phase 2 will open more businesses and allow the businesses open in phase 1 to expand their operations. We need to see 2 weeks of data to confirm no flare-up of COVID-19.
Meanwhile, anti-lockdown demonstrations were held in several states, including California, where officials had reclosed beaches beginning Friday to avoid a repeat of last weekend when crowds flocked to the shoreline. There were protests in 11 cities in California, where more than 50,000 coronavirus cases have been reported, with people chanting against the lockdown. In Huntington Beach, about 35 miles or 55 kilometers south of Los Angeles, several thousand people rallied to denounce Governor Gavin Newsom's beach shutdown order. And like the United States, governments around the world are struggling to balance the immense political and economic pressure to ease lockdowns with the need for public health measures against the spread of the virus, which has killed more than 236,000 people. Several European countries, including Austria, have begun to ease restrictions. Take a look.
Exactly. This is our actually plan that I'm hurry up with my baby home. We are planning to visit our grandmother and grandfather. So today is a celebration. We have a birthday of grandmother. So yeah, exactly. We are first time allowed, and we are going to use this opportunity.
That's correct. I think that's very important, that we keep our distance, that we don't think it's over now, because it's not. It will be with us for a while. So if we need to, I think we need to continue to observe the guidance and directions that we've been given of social distancing and not gathering, and take it seriously.
Vienna residents are now permitted to leave their homes with fewer restrictions as long as they do not meet in groups and respect social distancing rules, as Austria eases its lockdown measures. Public gatherings will be limited to 10 people or 30 for funerals until at least the end of June. Citizens are also expected to keep 1 meter or 3 feet away from those they do not live with, and face masks will still be mandatory in shops and public transport. Restaurants and cafes are set to reopen on May 15, but with new rules in place. A maximum of 4 patrons, excluding children, are allowed at each table, which must be at least 1 meter apart. Establishments are not allowed to offer items such as bread baskets and salt shakers for common use. Diners are advised to book ahead and will have to be shown to their tables by staff, who should wear masks. Cafes and restaurants will have to close by 11 p.m. Hotels are to be allowed to reopen for tourists from May 29, although the government has not said when restrictions on international travel could be eased. Austria has been spared the worst of the pandemic compared to some of its European neighbors, with 15,200 recorded cases and 569 deaths. And the United Kingdom achieved its target of over 100,000 tests per day And ministers have said that reaching the 100,000 a day testing target would allow the implementation of the next phase of the government strategy to test, track, and trace the potential coronavirus cases. Joining us live from the UK is Love Ann Season. Hello, Love Ann. Hello, Love Ann. Can you hear me?
Bobby, I can't hear anything. Is that still?
I can see you, Love Ann. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, Alma. Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Maintaining a positive attitude. How are you doing? Looking
Not
good.
too bad. Thank you, Alma. Doing the same as you.
What are your updates
Okay.
for us? Yes, go ahead.
Yes. So my updates for you is for Britain is that Britain announced that it had its target of conducting 100,000 coronavirus tests a day, that it may have hit it, a step toward eventually lifting lockdown rules in the UK, which this week overtook Spain to record the world's third highest death toll. Let's listen in.
At the beginning of last month, at this podium, I set a goal that anyone who needs a test should get a test, and that as a nation we should achieve 100,000 tests per day by the end of the month. I knew that it was an audacious goal, but we needed an audacious goal because testing is so important for getting Britain back on her feet. I can announce that we have met our goal.
Since the middle of April, numbers of people in hospital with COVID-19 have been falling. And that's particularly marked in London, that was ahead in terms of the infection rate, and therefore that fall has come quickest in London. It is starting to move down, maybe at a slower level in other regions of the UK, but nevertheless, overall the trend is downwards.
The government has faced weeks of criticism, particularly from health and social care workers, who say they have been unable to get tests, despite dealing with the COVID-19 patients. It also faced a backlash for not including deaths in care homes and wider community in official statistics, forcing a change on Wednesday. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Thursday that Britain was past the peak of the outbreak and that wider testing would be the key to keep the transmission rates down. Hancock said testing would also be crucial to lifting stringent lockdown measures imposed in late March and restoring social and economic freedoms. Also, some of the headlines here say that Prime Minister Boris Johnson has penciled in a date of May 26 for some workplaces to resume. Other reports from the Saturday paper suggest that government may relax the 2-meter distancing measure while introducing a scheme to see commuters tested for fever before boarding trains. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said the country was now past the peak of the disease and on the downward slope. At the daily media briefings, ministers faced the sacrifices of NHS staff and other healthcare workers who have died and underlined the tragedy of each death from coronavirus amongst the wider public. In Scotland, 1,515 people who tested positive for the virus have died, while the figure in Wales is 925. Northern Ireland has seen 365 deaths, and in England, the figure is 24,763. Recent data from the Office of National Statistics, which had provided the best picture so far of the impact on care homes, suggests that up to a third of all coronavirus-related deaths are happening there. The virus have been on a downward trend, although Friday saw 6,200 new cases, the highest daily total since 5th of April. However, there has been a significant rise in the number of people tested. Back to you, Alma.
Thank you very much, Love Ann, for your update. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alma. I am Love Ann Season, your ABC correspondent here in the United Kingdom, and we live in interesting times.
Ireland, however, extended its lockdown by 2 weeks to May 18, with Prime Minister Leo Varadkar saying the nation will reopen in a slow-phased, staged way after that. Take a listen.
Thanks to you, we are making a real difference. in the fight against COVID-19. The curve has been flattened and has now plateaued. Thousands of lives have been saved. Our hospitals and healthcare staff have not been overwhelmed. But we've not yet won this fight. As I mentioned earlier, we have a plan to ease restrictions from the 18th of May. But before that, we need 2 more weeks of tight restrictions to weaken the virus further, so it doesn't have the strength to make a comeback when we start to interact with each other again. Our plan is to reopen the country in a slow, staged, phased way. 5 stages, 3 weeks apart, starting on May 18th, and all things going to plan, with the 5th phase commencing on August 10th. So on the 18th of May, Ireland begins to reopen and begins that journey to a new normal. From that day, outdoor work, like construction and landscaping, will resume. Some retail outlets, like garden centres, hardware stores, repair shops, will reopen. And some outdoor sporting and fitness activities in small groups will be allowed. Many regular health services will resume operating, and it'll be possible to meet small groups of friends and family outdoors. In later phases, other workplaces, businesses, childcare, preschools, restaurants, cafes, bars, cinemas and gyms will reopen. Schools and colleges will reopen in September, October, at the start of the new academic year.
There will be small easing of some restrictions on Tuesday for a country that has suffered 1,265 deaths from the coronavirus, according to latest figures. Now, citizens will be permitted to travel further from their homes, up to 5 kilometers or 3.1 miles for the purpose of exercise. On Thursday, Health Minister Simon Harris said that the infection rate of the virus is now stable at below 1. Now, that means statistically, each confirmed case infects fewer than 1 new person, diminishing the spread of the virus. To Russia now, the Prime Minister, Mikhail Mishustin, has been diagnosed with a coronavirus. That and more from our EBC correspondent in Moscow, Emmy Coloma. Hello, Emmy.
Hello, Alma.
Yes, what are your updates for us, Emmy?
On the latest update in Russia, Health Department confirmed 9,623 new cases of COVID-19, bringing the country's total confirmed cases of 124,054 with 1,222 deaths and 15,013 patients having recovered from the virus. Ranked 7th most affected country in terms of infections. Russia could possibly tighten its coronavirus lockdown after May 11 if presidents don't follow the self-isolation rules over the May holidays, Consumer Protection Watchdog head Anna Popova said. Meanwhile, Moscow is currently working in setting up 44 hospitals to be used temporarily during the outbreak. The said hospitals can accommodate up to 10,000 coronavirus patients for treatment. Because of increasing numbers of cases each day, the country's industry has mobilized to manufacture more medical equipment and protective gears. However, the shortage still persists. In preventing the spread of the coronavirus, Russia is still undertake the induced self-isolation and extended it until 11 of May. For Eagle News reporting from Moscow, Russia, this is Emmy Coloma. We live in interesting time. Thank you, Alma.
Thank you, Emmy Coloma, reporting from Moscow, Russia. Thank you for your updates and for your time. Meanwhile, in South Asia, India announced the lockdown on its 1.3 billion people, the world's biggest, would continue for 2 more weeks from May 4. Take a listen.
I think we should continue with the lockdown for sure. Till the time we have flattened the curve, till the time there is a decrease in the number of cases, as a doctor I can say that we should continue with the lockdown.
I think we are damaging the society way more than we are actually protecting it by lockdown. And the reason they have done lockdown is because now it could be a political suicide of who will open first. Hence, the easiest thing for a politician is to just commit to a lockdown.
The lockdown imposed near the end of March has caused misery for millions of workers in India's vast informal sector and dealt a major blow to Asia's third biggest economy. The Home Ministry said in a statement that in view of significant gains in the COVID-19 situation, areas with few or no cases would see considerable relaxations. Air travel and passenger trains ground to a halt because of the lockdown, and only the transport of essential goods was allowed, causing major problems as well as considerable confusion for industry and agriculture. In particular, hundreds of thousands of migrant laborers were left jobless overnight, prompting a huge exodus of people back to their home villages, many on foot, and leaving many dependent on handouts. However, the stringent restrictions have been credited with keeping confirmed cases of coronavirus to about 35,000 cases as of Friday, with 1,152 deaths. The government said Friday that many activities will remain prohibited nationwide, including air and rail travel, except for select purposes, schools, restaurants, and large gatherings, such as places of worship. Restrictions are being lifted largely according to what color an area has been assigned in a government rating system. And Spain registered 281 deaths from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours, bringing the total toll to 24,824, confirming the slowdown in the pandemic, according to figures released on Friday local time. Spain further eased strict lockdown measures this weekend, allowing individuals to leave the house and for sports activities. The move follows an easing of restrictions last weekend when children were allowed out of the house for the first time since March 14. But kids are only allowed out during certain hours of the day to avoid overcrowding. Children and the elderly are also not allowed to go out at the same time in a bid to keep them apart. This easing occurs after 7 weeks of severe confinement, during which the Spanish could only leave their houses if they couldn't work from home, to go to the supermarket, the pharmacy, or briefly take the dog out. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez announced that the beginning of the deconfinement could begin from May 11, with several phases until the end of June, if conditions allow. Meanwhile, South Africans are flocking the outdoors as lockdown restrictions begin to ease. People are now allowed to exercise outside 3 hours a day. Take a look.
Absolutely amazing. It's the first 2 Ks was like suffering, and after that it's just like natural. It's like riding a bike basically. It feels good to be back. We actually take for granted. I mean, if you look at this, I could do this every day.
I think they're doing a good job. I really do. I think everybody does. Some of the things are hard to understand, but they're, we've got to just believe in their logic and their methods. But yeah, in general, I think they've been doing a great job.
If I'm not running, I'm not feeling well. I just feeling like I didn't do something.
And WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus said the world had enough time to intervene in response to the COVID-19 outbreak, adding that the public health emergency declaration on January 30 was actually declared in a timely fashion that allows enough time for the rest of the world to respond. Here are the highlights of the briefing.
The world had enough time to intervene. And I can say it again, me and my colleagues believe that, and the emergency committee, this public health emergency, the global emergency on January 30, was actually declared in a timely fashion that allows enough time for the rest of the world to respond. To declare global emergency in that situation, I think it says it all. It says it all. And anything between 22 and 30th January was to collect information.
It is clear, the advice to the DG was clear, yes, COVID-19 is still a public health emergency of international concern. COVID-19 pandemic is not finished.
When that disease gets into an institution or a facility in which there are many vulnerable people, be it people with underlying conditions, older populations, then the impact of the disease, not just the transmission, is great. Over the last week, a number of weeks, we've seen worrying increases of disease in Haiti, in Somalia, in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Yemen, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Sierra Leone, in the Central African Republic, and most recently investigating a serious cluster of respiratory disease in adults in Kano in northern Nigeria. We remain deeply concerned about the impact that this disease will have in communities who are already greatly underserved, have many underlying conditions, and it's a real concern for the humanitarian community. We have listened again and again to numerous scientists who've looked at the sequences, looked at this virus, and we are assured that this virus is natural in origin, and what is important is that we establish what that natural host for this virus is. The primary purpose of doing that is to ensure that we understand the virus more, we understand the animal-human interface, and we understand how the animal-human species barrier was breached. And the purpose of understanding that is that we can put in place the necessary prevention and public health measures to prevent that happening again.
Testing alone does not work. Contact tracing alone does not work. Lockdowns alone do not work. It has to be part of a comprehensive strategy. Testing needs to be strategic. It can't be testing every single person in the population. It's just not feasible. It's just not possible. We have tried to be very clear in our testing strategy and prioritizing your tests for suspect cases, testing suspect cases and contacts who develop symptoms. That's the priority. You heard of a report the other day of an inflammatory disease in some children that was identified in the UK. Now that is significant in the sense that we have astute clinicians and nurses and healthcare professionals who are looking at how this infection is impacting the body, and they picked up a signal. This may be a real signal having to do with COVID-19, or it actually may not have to do with COVID-19 at all. What we've done within our clinical network, which is our global clinical network, is raise the alert and say, please look out for this.
COVID. So could you please tell us what is exactly
From the studies that have been conducted, which are well-designed studies in households, for example, they've looked at if adults are transmitting to children or if children are transmitting to adults. And in most of those studies, it's adults transmitting to children. But there have been some instances where they're suspected that the children infected the adults. So it can go both ways. Again, we need more information to better understand this. But children do remain susceptible, and they can get infected with this virus, but they do tend to have mild disease.
What is your general advice to countries around the world in regards to
Promising never to lie and saying she prays for coronavirus victims, new White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany had a strikingly sunny tone in her debut press conference. In her briefing, she covered a wide range of issues, including the president's claims that he has seen evidence proving the new coronavirus originated in a Chinese lab. Let's listen in.
Serious consideration being given to putting new tariffs on China, or was the president just spitballing yesterday?
Look, I won't get ahead of any announcements from the president, but I will echo the president's displeasure with China.
It's no secret that China mishandled this situation. Just a few examples for you. They did not share the genetic sequence until a professor in Shanghai did so on his own the very next day. China shut down his lab for, quote, rectification. They slow-walked information on human-to-human transmission alongside the World Health Organization and didn't let U.S. investigators in at a very important time. So we take displeasure with China's actions, but I certainly won't get ahead of the president with those announcements.
Is the president seriously considering forcing China to pay some sort of compensation, reparations, whatever word you want to put on it?
Again, when it comes to retaliatory measures, I will not get ahead of the president on that.
Will you pledge never to lie to us from that podium?
I will never lie to you. You have my word on that.
North Korea's Kim Jong-un has made his first public appearance in nearly 3 weeks, according to state media on Saturday, following intense speculation that the leader of the nuclear-armed nation was seriously ill or possibly dead. The North reported that Kim had attended the opening of a fertilizer factory and released pictures it said showed the leader cutting a ribbon at the ceremony on Friday in Suncheon, north of Pyongyang, although the appearance could not be verified. Rumors about Kim's health have been swirling since his conspicuous no-show at April 15 celebrations for the birthday of his grandfather, the North's founder, the most important day in the country's political calendar. Now, his absence triggered a series of fevered rumors and unconfirmed reports over his condition, while the United States and South Korea insisted they had no information to believe any of the conjecture was true. Previous absences from the public eye on Kim's part have also prompted speculation about his health. Kim's father and predecessor had been dead for 2 days before anyone outside the innermost circles of North Korean leadership was aware. In 2014, Kim Jong-un dropped out of sight for nearly 6 weeks before reappearing with a cane days later. The South spy agency said he had undergone surgery to remove a cyst from his ankle. 23 staff at a hospital in Qatar were injured when tents being used to boost capacity in response to the coronavirus collapsed in a fierce storm, according to local media on Friday. Take a look. Winds of up to 72 kilometers per hour or 45 miles per hour caused 2 temporary tent annexes at Hazem Meibarik General Hospital in Qatar's industrial area to collapse on Thursday, according to the Gulf Times. No patients were hurt and most injuries to staff at the facility, 20 kilometers southwest of central Doha, were minor, according to the Daily, citing the health ministry. During the gale-force winds on Thursday, a Qatar Airways Boeing 787 on the ground was blown into a nearby Airbus A350 at Doha's Hamad Airport, causing minor damage but no injuries, according to the airline in a statement. The industrial area is a gritty, densely populated district that is home to mostly migrant laborers and has been the epicenter of Qatar's outbreak. Eagle News will be right back.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell warned during a press conference that the coronavirus pandemic poses considerable risks to the U.S. economy and says that now is not the time to worry about deficits. Take a look.
Just read the sentence. It says, ongoing public health crisis will weigh heavily on economic activity, employment, and inflation in the near term and poses considerable risks to the economic outlook over the medium term. At the Fed, we're doing all we can to help American families and businesses weather this difficult period. When the spread of the virus is under control, businesses will reopen and people will come back to work. We will continue to use our tools to assure that the recovery, when it comes, will be as robust as possible. Many of these programs rely on emergency lending powers that are available only in very unusual circumstances, such as those we find ourselves in today. We are deploying these lending powers to an unprecedented extent, enabled in large part by the financial backing and support from Congress and the Treasury. We will continue to use these powers forcefully, proactively, and aggressively until we're confident that we are solidly on the road to recovery. The time will come again, and reasonably soon, I think, where we can think about a long-term way to get our fiscal house in order, and we absolutely need to do that. But this is not the time to be, in my personal view, this is not the time to let that concern, which is a very serious concern, but to let that get in the way of us winning this battle, really.
Sean Riley, Stephen Henderson, and fellow tenants living in New York unfurl a banner during a walkout in front of the building. Like thousands of others across New York, these tenants are participating in a strike demanding rent cancellation as the coronavirus pandemic sends unemployment rates soaring and has much of the country homebound in shelter they now stand to lose. Take a look.
Pandemic, and so now we've been organizing to have this rent strike because a lot of the tenants in our building, a lot of the tenants in our association have lost their incomes and aren't able to pay rent, and so we decided to go on strike to take collective action and to stand together in these, scary times. The moratorium on evictions is, it's great that people aren't going to get evicted until midway through June, but it's just kicking the can down the road. There's got to be something else. They have to cancel rent. And just, people aren't getting the wages back that they've lost from losing their jobs in the middle of this crisis. And unless you do something to forgive rent, it's going to be a problem.
Concern, it's kind of an anxious thought at the back of my head most of the time, thinking about, when this kind of settles down and what the landlord's going to do repercussions-wise for us for stalling on rent or not paying. But right now it's kind of, a later down the road question. Day-to-day lives, and I know that if landlords and building owners come and ask for rent for months in back pay all at once, or even putting people on payment plans, that's either going to put people out on the street or it's going to put people in even more dire straits than they were before.
To be conveyed is there was a housing crisis in New York for a long time before this. Apartments were unaffordable. Crown Heights has been the epicenter of gentrification and displacement in Brooklyn for, well over a decade. So all that crisis was happening before this, and, this is what pushes it over the edge, I guess.
Protests, which coincide with May Day, are believed to be the largest such coordinated tenant activity in New York since the 1930s, when mass strikes took aim at rent gouging. An estimated 12,000 unique tenants across 100 buildings in America's coronavirus epicenter participated in this strike, according to preliminary figures from the advocacy group Housing Justice for All, a lead organizer of the movement. Nearly two-thirds of New York's 8.6 million residents rent in a housing market where, according to Tracker Rent Cafe, the average two-bedroom can run from $2,500 per month in Queens to more than $4,000 a month in Manhattan.
I was like, how's the French?
Meanwhile, the French economy officially fell into a recession after contracting 5.8% in the first quarter, according to the National Statistics Office on Thursday, underscoring the massive toll of the country's nationwide shutdown to curb the coronavirus outbreak. Even though the business closures and stay-at-home orders were imposed to only the final 2 weeks of the quarter, the drop-off in activity was a hammer blow that has put more than half of France's private sector employees out of work. It was the worst quarterly performance since the NC Statistics Agency began charting French gross domestic product in 1949 and follows a 0.1% decline in the last quarter of 2019, meeting the definition of a recession as 2 consecutive quarters of contraction. NC said the drop was due mainly to the halt of non-essential activities since mid-March, underscoring a 7.3% collapse in household spending on goods, a drop that reached 17.9% in March alone. The government has already said it expects an 8% contraction for the French economy this year as it prepares to start lifting the lockdown on May 11. It has announced 110 billion euros in financial aid and other relief for businesses, and President Emmanuel Macron has vowed that no company would be abandoned to the risk of bankruptcy. Meanwhile, European Central Bank Chief Christine Lagarde said the eurozone economy could shrink by 5 to 12% this year because of the coronavirus crisis. Let's listen in.
Given the high uncertainty surrounding the ultimate extent of the economic fallout, growth scenarios produced by ECB staff suggest that euro area GDP could fall by between 5 and 12% this year, depending crucially on the duration of the containment measures and the success of policies to mitigate the economic consequences for businesses and workers. As the containment measures are gradually lifted, these scenarios foresee a recovery in economic activity, although its speed and scale remain highly uncertain.
The ECB has unveiled a flurry of stimulus measures in recent weeks to shore up the eurozone economy and keep credit flowing in the financial system. Now that includes a 750 billion euro pandemic emergency bond purchasing program, bringing the ECB's total asset purchases to around 1.1 trillion euros this year. The ECB on Thursday said it was fully prepared to increase the emergency scheme if necessary. It also kept interest rates at historic lows and rolled out fresh incentives to encourage banks to keep lending to households and firms throughout the crisis. Lagarde said the world was facing a global health crisis and that the highest priority has to go to saving lives. And the International Labour Organization said some 1.6 billion people employed in the informal economy, or nearly half the global workforce, could see their livelihoods destroyed due to the continued decline in working hours brought on by lockdowns to curb the spread of COVID-19. Here's Mr. Guy Ryder, the Director General of the International Labour Organization. Let's listen in.
Well, the figures that we have launched today show that the job destruction effect of this pandemic are actually deepening. We estimate that in the second quarter of this year, the loss of full-time jobs is the equivalent of 305 million jobs worldwide. We'd previously estimated that figure much lower, 3 weeks ago, at 195 million. So I think the evidence is that the effect of the lockdowns, the necessary measures being taken to stop the health pandemic, is having a really dramatic effect on jobs in the world. And that's the key point. The second thing we've tried to do in this third edition of our monitor is to focus on perhaps some of the most vulnerable, some of the most exposed people in global labour markets. That's the 60% of humanity which earns a living in the informal economy. And here, I'm afraid, the figures are equally dramatic. We estimate that some 1.6 billion informal workers are now strongly, devastatingly impacted in their livelihoods by what is happening. We estimate that the average income of informal economy workers around the world, the hit will be 60%. These are people who don't earn a lot of money in the first instance. So the most vulnerable desperately need international solidarity assistance simply to survive. This is the issue. At the same time as we talk about preserving jobs, protecting the unemployed, we're very interested, of course, in what's happening to enterprises. And our monitor focuses as well on the impact on enterprises. And there we see that in the sectors most badly hit by the pandemic, and that's retail and wholesale, its manufacturing, its business services. We are seeing that some 436 million enterprises around the world are at high risk of going under. So these enterprises too need support, they need the attention of governments.
The coronavirus quarantine can be lonely, but at one Tokyo hotel, which has been converted to accept patients with mild symptoms, a humanoid robot will be there to offer support and encouragement, as well as admonishments and warnings. Take a look.
ホテルでの滞在は2週間程度の隔離の生活になってくると思いますので、それを快適に親しみを持って迎え入れてくれるロボットを使っていくということで。
Also on a positive note, one balloon artist in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is making waves by coloring Philly with hope. El Aguilar has the story.
In this time of coronavirus crisis, a Filipino-American artist is bringing joy and lifting spirits in the lower North Philadelphia neighborhood of Fairmont. Jace Florescio, a mother of two, motivated by a story of kids trying to spot a rainbow on the block to cheer them up, all she wanted was to give color and hope to her neighbors who, like they, are sheltered in place. Suddenly, in the midst of uncertainty, Florescio's one-year-old business bloomed. Neighbors, those stuck at home in quarantine and lockdown, reached out to her requesting to rainbow somebody's home. This pandemic definitely puts Florescio on a positive side. Not only she's filling the neighborhood with rainbow, the turn of events actually helped her and her family cope in this time of distress. These colorful balloons will not go up and away. These rainbow-colored balloons will stay on the ground to color Philly with hope. And as for the grateful artist, all she can say is, for Eagle News, El Aguilar reporting. We live in interesting times.
And before we close, we leave you with a word of hope. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. See you again Monday evening. Good night. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.